Hey, Nyakun here. In today's video, we are going to dive into the new layout engine introduced in Breakdance version 2 and above. So this update is a significant step forward as many users have been requesting more control over layout options. So this update delivers on these requests and more. With this update, there are now 4 new layout options available. 2 of these options were previously available and 2 new ones have been added, expanding on the earlier features. These additions provide more granular control, and also it ranges from Flexbox to the Grid system. Today, we will explore these layout options in details to familiarize ourselves and their use. Before we even get into the new layout option, I want to show you how the old one or how the old layout options used to look like. After that, we will dive even deeper into the new options and see what is so new and what are the advantages of it. Let's get into a development environment. All right, so first thing first, I'm going to show you how the old layout used to look like. So in this development, I'm going to add a new section, and then I'm going to add some few items within that section. So let's add a div, and then we can just duplicate the div over here, or we can also use Command D to duplicate them. All right, we've added 5 items within this section. When you go into layout, this is where you are able to tell your section how it should display items. At the moment, our section is displaying items in the column fashion. When it comes to the column fashion, you stack items on top of each other. You can change that and make sure that your items are being displayed in a row. So when you go into horizontal with alignment, you can change this one either to be on the left, centered, right, space in between, space around, and space evenly. If you choose left, it will stack everything on the left hand side, and if you choose right, it's going to do the opposite of that. You can also place items in the center. One more thing, a few more options that you do have is space in between, space around, and then space evenly. These are all row options or your flex row options that you can do. You can align your flex child or your flex children in these alignment options. You can also vertical align them, either top, middle, or bottom. For you to do that, you have to make sure that the size of your height is a bit bigger. So with this, when you go back into your horizontal, you are able to align your items in the middle. You can also place it to the bottom or baseline based on the text that is within your flex children. All right, so that was the old layout. Now let's get into the new layout and see what is actually really there. So this being done, let's go into Breakdance version 2 beta 1. All right, so in here there are a few things. We've already laid out something. We are going to use that to demonstrate how the new layout works. All right, so this is our first section, and our first section, our items within this section is in a column fashion. I'm going to go into layout. When I open this layout, as I showed you, there are 4 new options over here. You have your flex column, you have the flex row, you have your basic grid, and you have your advanced. Under the advanced, you have even more options when it comes to your flex and your grid. Your first 3 items are more basic things that most people are going to need when they are building out their layout. So within the flex column, we have laid out these items that are stacking on top of each other. So they are stacking on your y-axis. So you can see that you can align item to the left. As you can see, this has been aligned to the left. You can align item to your right. As you can see, this is being aligned to the right. The reason why this is not aligning is because the width of this item is 100%. We can change that. Let's try and place, let's say, yeah, when we do, all right, so custom is going to do it this way. So clicking back on the section, we can align it to the center, we can align it to the left, We can also align the vertically. We can also align it to the top. We can align it to the middle, and then we can also align it to the bottom. You can also deal with your gap. How much gap do you need? You can change this one to 20, to 100, or to whatever gap that you need when it comes to the layout that you're doing. So that is our flex column. So looking at this section, we do have a div, and then we do have an image. Within this div, we do have text, and then we have a subtext, and we have two buttons. As I said, creating two buttons where one is on the left and the other is on the right is possible because of flex row. So we are going to dig into that a bit and see how that works. All right. So this is a div that holds two buttons. I'm going to expand it. On the left hand side, we do have this, and then on the right hand side, we do have that. Clicking back on our div, let's go into our layout and see what is actually happening. So over here, we have seen that we have selected the second icon, which represents our flex row. By doing that, we've placed our two buttons on the same horizontal plane, one on the left and one on the right.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back into our section and even explore this even further. Clicking back on our second icon, you can see that our items are now on our horizontal axis, or it is horizontally aligned. One is on the left, one is on the right. As I said, this is good for creating content or for creating hero sections where you have your text and buttons on the left and your other items on the right. Even more, let's explore some of the sub options under our flex row. Down here, we do have alignment. So let's choose some of these and see what is actually going to happen. Let's choose right. So when you choose right, your alignment makes sure that everything is aligned to the right side of your container. As you can see, when you choose left, it aligns your items on the left side of your container. But also, you have to see that these alignments are also on the horizontal plane. They are not on any other plane. Also, you can make sure that your items are spaced in between, where one is placed at the far end, which is the image, and then the other one is placed at the beginning of the container. You can also select space around if that is what you're looking for. The next option here is your vertical alignment. Remember, vertical means starting from the top to the bottom. So meaning that everything that we are going to experience now is going to make sure that things are aligned on this plane. So let's select center or middle. So when you choose middle on your vertical alignment, it aligns your content within your container vertically in the middle. When you choose end or bottom, it places it at the end of your container. When you choose start or top, it places it at the top of your container. We can also talk about gap, but before we even do that, let's change our alignment from space around to left so that we can actually see how the gap works. So for gap, I'm going to give it a gap of 20 pixels. So how the gap works is that it separates the items without you having to use either margins or padding. Also, another great thing when it comes to your flex row or your basic flex row option is that you do have vertical art. Why this is important is if, let's say, you do not want to use the advanced flex option, but you want to create something that is still responsive using your basic flex option, vertical art is really a great option. Let me show you how this actually works. So let's say we do have everything over here, and then let's look at our breakpoint. So this is what our breakpoint is looking like. So probably on tablet portrait, we do not want things to look like this because it is not really nice. So we might want things to stack on top of each other. To do that, that is where your vertical art actually comes to play. So let's see some of the options over here. Let's click here. So we are saying that where do we want our items to start stacking on top of each other? Right now we are at tablet portrait. We can choose tablet portrait and see. When we choose tablet portrait, you can see that now our items are stacking on top of each other on this breakpoint. So anything below this breakpoint, our items are going to stack on top of each other. After that, there is an alignment option. If, let's say, even though these items have been stacking on each other, they have been aligned to the left hand side. What about if we want to center this? What you can do is you can go to your alignment when vertical. Over here, we can either choose on the left, on the right, or your flex start, your flex end, or center. Let's choose center. When you choose center, you do get something like this, meaning that all your items have now been centered. We can also choose flex end, where it places all your items at the end of your container. Or we can choose flex start, where all your items are now at the flex start or the start of your container. Next, let's talk about basic grid option. This isn't strictly part of Flexbox, but it's often used alongside it. The basic grid allows elements to be arranged in a more rigid two-dimensional layout compared to Flexbox one-dimensional row or column approach. Here, you can define columns and rows and place your items exactly where you want them, which can be incredibly useful for more complex designs. In Breakdance, if you want to access your basic grid option, you add a section as I have over here, and I have one image in this section. I'm going to go into layout. In version 2, you have 3 icons. Your third icon is your basic grid option. Let's select that. When you select that, you can see that the image has now shrunk and is now stretching out. The next thing that I want to do is I want to define how many items is going to be on one row. So let's say I want to have 4 items on one row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my image and duplicate it as many times as I want. So I've added 8 images to my section. I have 4 items per row in this section. So this is 4 items per row, and this is 4 items per row. The next thing that I can actually really do is let's select this section. Let's go into size and let's remove our minimum height. So with our minimum height now removed, what we can actually do is we can also define the space between our items. So over here, let's say I want a space of 5 pixels. You can see that now between each item, there is 5 pixel spacing or gap. The next thing that we can actually talk about is within this advanced section of the basic grid. Let's click on this icon. This icon gives you a whole lot of options. The only issue is none of these options are going to work in this video. Why? Because there's a bug that has affected it. So we won't be able to actually dive into it. When we get to the advanced grid section, some of these options are over there. And I mean, all of these options and more are over there that we can actually see how they work. So when a new beta comes out, we'll try and find out if this bug has been fixed, and we are going to make a video explaining it. So mostly that is all when it comes to the basic grid option. There is not much over here to talk about apart from making sure that you have input your value for the number of items per row, and also making sure that the spacing between your items are also defined. If you do not define it, there is an already defined value that is going to work for you. And then, as we said, we are not going to talk about what is in the advanced because there is a bug that is affecting it. Before we dive into the advanced section, Let's quickly recap what a flex column layout is. Using the flex direction column, Flexbox allows you to stack elements vertically within a container. Just like how when you select this column, everything is stacking on top of each other and you can give it a gap as you want. This is good when you are creating mobile layouts, and it's also good when you're creating a vertical navigation. All right, going back into our advanced option, when flex selected, we are going to look at flex column. When you select flex column, if you have any items within your flex container, a lot of things wouldn't change because by default, Breakdance sets its option to column. So you can see that nothing is changing. The next thing, under this flex column options, we can talk about align items. With this, I am going to open an illustration for us to discuss. All right, so in here, we do have a main axis and then a cross axis. This is for talking about flex column. When you talk about alignment, you align your items on the cross axis, not on the main axis. And I'm going to show you that illustration when you go into building things. All right, so with align items, let's go in here and choose flex start. When you choose flex start, nothing happens because by default, this layout is already starting from the left, which is flex start. When we go in and we change it to flex end, it places it to the end. Why? Because that is where flex end is. When you go in and you change this one to center, it places it in the center. And when you change it to baseline, it places it on the baseline. You can also do stretch, but we don't have enough space to actually demonstrate this. But it is also going to stretch your items. All right, that being said, we have covered what align items is. So I'm just going to place it on flex start, which is the beginning. All right, the next thing that we can talk about when it comes to flex direction column, we can talk about justify content. With justify content, we are going to go back to the illustration. You justify your content on the main axis. So everything that you're going to justify is only going to be from top to bottom. When you align your items from left to right. Right. Going back over here, what we are going to do is we are going to pick one of these options. Let's start with flex end. So you can see that when you choose flex end, it places it to the end of your flex container. When you choose flex start, it places it to the top of it. When you choose space in between, it spaced the item up between each other. Using the same technique over here, let me open the structure panel. You can see that we do have a div, and with this div, there are two buttons inside. We are stacking each button on top of each other. When I go into this layout, I can remove the old options, and then I can go into our advanced option, choose flex, and then I'll choose flex column. With this, I can give this a gap of 20 pixels. Probably that is too big. We can give it a gap of 5 pixels. So you can use this to stack your items. Mostly that is what flex column gives you. There are a few more things that we can cover. You can also talk about wrapping your items. This is important when you have your items on a row. So the next thing we can look at is flex wrap. We can actually have a better understanding of this when we get to our flex row. Also, when it comes to aligning content, this property comes into play if there are multiple lines of items due to wrapping. It aligns the entire content within the container. It is similar. It's very similar to when you align your items or when you justify your content. But since we do not have any content wrapping, we might not actually see the importance of this, but we can still see how it works. So when you place it on flex start, it places it over here. When you place it on flex end, it places it to the end. When you place it on flex center, it places it to the center. And then in between, you don't see anything space around it tried to place the item within that space around parameters, and then you can also try and do stretch. But as I said, you actually see the pointers of this if you have items wrapping around each other. So now let's remove this to Flex Start and then talk about gaps. So we can give this 50 pixels of row gap. You can also place your gap over here. This is to create spacing between your containers or your items. So since we do not have any text over here, so what we are going to do is we are going to select this container, go into advanced, choose flex, and then we can deal with this text. So you can see that now when you do your text align, every item within this container does not get affected. It is only the text within the container that gets affected. So let's say within this container, we want everything to be, we want the row, and then we want our items to be centered, right? You can see that the text also has been centered, but this text over here is not centered by itself, even though the wrapper around the text is centered. So what you can do is you can choose text align so that all the text that is within this container is now also centered. So that is the importance of the text align. So if you want your container and your text, everything within it to be centered, you can choose center for your alignment, and then you can also choose center for your text alignment too. All right, so that is that when it comes to flex column with respect to the advanced level. So the next thing we're going to look at is our flex row. So when you do have flex row, you have your items on the horizontal plane or the horizontal axis. When you choose flex row, you have a lot of the options that are very similar to the flex column, but they do the very opposite of what the flex column does. Let's look at item align items. We're going to use our illustration to also talk about this. With this, we have our main axis and then our cross axis. This is very opposite to what the column one is about. With the column, our main axis was this vertical line and our cross axis was this horizontal line. But when it comes to flex row, our main axis is the horizontal line and our cross axis is this very line. So when it comes to aligning your items, you're going to align items on this very plane. So every item is going to be aligned from top to bottom. So this is going to be a flex start, this is going to be a flex center, or this is going to be a center, and this is going to be a flex end, and so on and so forth. All right, going back into our design. Over here, we are going to illustrate what we just talked about. Flex end, it places your item at the very end of your cross axis, which is the vertical line. Flex start places it at the top. Flex center places it at the center. When you do a stretch, if we had, as you can see, our div has now stretched all the way down, and then also our image has now stretched all the way down. So if our items were not particularly stacked to the top and they were, let's say, a div, you can see this if I select this section, right, and add some color in here. So now you can see that we do have this container stretching out. These items wouldn't stretch out because they have a precise height. If they didn't have a precise height, they will also stretch out. So that is what flex stretch, or that is what the align item stretch will do to your items. So let's remove this color and then go back into our main design, our main container, and then we can also talk about baseline. So baseline places this on the baseline of your text. All right, so let's remove that and leave it at flex start. Sorry, let's do flex start. The next item or the next option is justify your content. Remember, justify content, justify your content on the main axis, which is the horizontal line when we talk about flex row. All right, so let's start with flex end. It places your item at the end of your flex container. Let's do flex start. It places it at the start of your horizontal plane or your horizontal axis or your main axis. And then when you choose flex center, it places it in the center. Remember, when you combine justify content center and align content center, you will place everything at your crossroad of your main axis and your cross axis. Let's take this back to flex start. And then you can also talk about space in between, and then space around, and then also space evenly. Space evenly, as I said, it makes sure that your content, the space between your content, is evenly distributed. We can then go back and place this on, let's say, flex start. So the next thing that we are going to talk about is flex wrap. So how does flex wrap works? At the moment, if I choose no wrap, nothing happens. When I choose wrap, nothing happens. When I choose wrap reverse, it places this at the bottom. So what is actually happening, and how can we actually fix this? All right, so I'm going to select this main container, and I'm going to give this 100%. And then I'm going to also choose this, and I'm going to make sure that it is 100%. Our main structure was that our image was at the, all right. So our image is at the bottom, and then our div is at the top. So this has changed. The reason why this has changed is, let's select this section because we have this on flex wrap reverse. Let's place this one on no wrap. So when there is no wrap and your item is even 100%, you can see that the items do not come to the next line. So no wrap prevents the items within your flex container to refuse to go on the next line. It doesn't matter how many 100% you add to it, they're still not going to go on the next line. And this item is 100%, this item is 100%, and we expect them to go to the next line, but they will not go to the next line because we do have flex wrap on no wrap. If we change this one to wrap, so now you can see that these items have now wrap around each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. I'm going to give it 50%. I'm going to select this, give it 50%. And then I'm going to select our main container. Maybe 50% is too much. Let's do 51. All right. So this is 51% and this is 50%. 51% plus 50% is more than 100%, meaning that one item needs to move to the next line because this item, like both of them, cannot live in the same line or in the same house. We can also talk about flex reverse. So when you do flex reverse, your item now reverse itself. What was at the bottom goes to the top. What was on top comes to the bottom, which we have demonstrated over here. All right, let's place this one on wrap, which is okay. So now we can even look at our gaps. So when you do give this a gap of 50, you can see that the gap is produced. You can give it 500 pixels or whatever number that actually works with your own design. So you can either place it over here or you can place it if you do have a row. If let's say this content is 45% and then we give this 50 pixels of gap, it is not going to work unless you place the gap value over here. So that is how the gap works when it comes to your column. We can also talk about align content. All right, so let's say flex end, it places it to the end. Flex center, it places it to the center. Space in between. If these items were wrapping, you would have seen the value of spacing it between. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make sure that this container is 51%. So 51%, consider space in between. Let's change this one to center. It places into the center. When you do space in between, it spaces it out. When you do space around, it adds space to the top and the bottom. And then if you do stretch, it will stretch out your content. And then if you do baseline, it places it on the baseline. So that is what flex align content with its value will give or will do to your own design. Just as we said, text alignment basically deals with the alignment of the text within either the container or the section. And we already demonstrated that when we talked about flex column. Now let's look at the advanced grid in Breakdance version 2. We have a section here with a few images. Let's go into layout and then the fourth icon, and then we choose grid. In here, you get a few options that are pretty straightforward and some are a bit daunting, but we're going to get through that. We do have grid over here and we do have template. You can see that these are open spaces, meaning that you have to actually type in something. In our basic grid, we had only two options, and then we do have an advanced over here, but these are mainly what people are using. You are able to determine the items per row and your space gap. But in the advanced, you do not have the opportunity to determine the items per row. You have to actually input some CSS values. So which CSS values do these two options do take? We're going to use the grid template. Both of them, they receive the same, the grid and the grid template receive the same value input. All right, so using this, to first create a 4-column grid, you first have to determine your height. And then we are saying that our height is auto. So auto backslash. The next thing that we want to determine is the number of columns. Over here, we want to create a 4-column grid. So let's put it in the word repeat, open bracket, and then 4, 1FR. So 1FR means that one fractional unit. So we are dividing the width of our grid equally. We can even change this one to something else. Let's say we want it to be 200 pixels rather. You can change it to, let's say, 300 pixels, meaning that your grid is going to have 300 pixel width for each cell. So whatever that your preference is, let's change this to 200 pixels. All right. Next thing that we want to actually tackle on is your gaps. Let's input a gap of 50. So you can see that each gap is 50 pixels, whether for the row or for the columns. But when you go down, you can see that there is row gap. So with row gap, you can even make this smaller. So you can see that the left and the right is bigger than the top and the bottom, because you have the option to do that in the advanced grid. You do not have that option in the basic one. The next thing we want to talk about is justify item. To do that, I'm going to add a div, and then I'm going to add a text. I'm going to go into the div. I'm going to give it a pattern of 10 pixels all around, and then I'm going to give it a background color of this. I'm going to drag the div up here. All right, so that being done, now let's talk about justify items. When you justify items, you only justify the items within the cell. You do not justify the entire grid. So justify items is for the cells or the grid items. So let me show you how this works. So let's say we do have justify item and we do end. Over here, you cannot see anything happening. I'm going to reduce the length of our text. So when you do that, you can see that now our div is now placed to the end of our cell. We can also change that to start and change that to center, and we can even do stretch, which is the default. The next thing that we want to talk about is align items. So when we do end, it places it to the end. When we do center, it places it to the center, and you can also do stretch. So you stretched out on the horizontal, and we've also stretched out on the vertical. So that is what these two items they do. You only affect the grid cell. You do not affect the entire grid. All right, let's remove all the values that we chose so that it becomes blank. The next thing we want to deal with is your justify content. Your justify content only works if the width of your grid is bigger than the width of your grid items. All right, let me show you how. So let's say over here we do have a 200 pixels for each cell or each grid item. When we go into justify content and we do center, you can see that our grid is now centered within our grid container. We can go in and choose stretch, and it's going to stretch it out, and then we can do end, and it's going to place it to the end. We can do space around, it's going to space it around, and so on and so forth.
Anna.
What if this one wasn't 200 pixels and it was 1 FR? So when you do 1 FR, it means that we are going to take the size of your grid and we are going to divide them equally. So with this, you won't be able to do no end, no start, none of that, because the width of your grid is equal to your grid container. So that is what it is. So let's go back and change this one to 200 pixels. Okay, and then we are going to do center. All right, now we want to look at align content. Let's change this one to end. Nothing actually happens because the height of our grid container is equal to the height of our grid. So what we can do is that we can select a section, go into size, and then we can change this one to, let's say, 800 pixels.
Yeah.
Going back into our layout, let's minimize that. Our align content is already to the end. So now our content has moved to the end, or our grid has moved to the end of our grid container. We can place this onto the start of our grid container. We can place this to the center of our grid container. We can space around. We can also space in between, and so on and so forth. So to recap a few things, justifying items and justify content are different. Justify items will justify the items in your cell. Justify content will justify your grid. Then let's remove this. And then align items will align the items within your cell. Align content will align your grid. So that is the difference between these options over here. Then we do have grid auto column, grid auto row, grid auto flow. These are things that we can talk about, but not in this video. There's also align text or text align. What this happens is that it aligns the text within your cell. So if you did have text within your cell, this will be able to align them. Okay, so that is probably the basics of your advanced grid. There are a lot of things that you can do, but this is actually the basics. From here, we are going to look at a real world example and see some of even the most complicated things when it comes to dealing with grid. So now we want to actually look at a real world example of how to use grid to build something more complicated. And when it comes to doing that, we'll also see some of the sub values, or the sub properties when it comes to every grid item. So every grid item has sub properties. We are going to look at these sub properties and see how they make you building grid even more fun and also complex. All right, let's go into Figma. So this is the design from the Bento grid layout website. It must be for someone on Dribble or something like that. All right, so in here there are a lot of things going on, but what I can say is that I have already drawn these lines, and these lines, they help me determine how many columns are in here and then how many rows are in here. And from my lines, I have determined that we do have 9 rows and then 16 columns. All right, I do think that this cell over here, or this grid item, is 3 rows and then 3 columns. This one is 2 rows and then 4 columns, and then this one is 9 rows. Sorry, this one is 9 columns and 5 rows. So 9 columns across and then 5 rows. So 16 by 9. All right, how do you translate this from this design into something that we can see on, let's say, using Breakdance to build? that's what we're going to try and do. So I'm going to scroll down over here. So I have done my cell here. I do have these items to make it much faster to go. So these are just, let's say you just added div blocks and I've just colored them and input these values in here to make it simple for me to see. Nothing to worry about here. So selecting my section, I'm going to go into layout, choose this advanced, and I'm going to select grid. All right, when we select grid, you can see that our items have been stretched out, but that's not what we actually want. We want, remember, 9 rows and 16 columns. How do we take that from just words into what we do see, as we can see over here? All right, so to do that, when we were talking about this, we said that you can determine the height of your row. You can also determine the number of rows. So we are learning something new right now. So the number of rows, how do you determine that? We use that same technique of repeat. So let's say repeat, how many items per row? How many rows do we want? So open bracket, we want 9, and then comma, and then you can talk about what is the height of your row. But right now we just want 1 FR, which is good. That is the number of rows. And then we did our backslash and then space. And then we are going to also say that we want 16 columns. So repeat, and then 16, comma, 1 FR, and I close them. So now you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So from here to here, we can also input 8 grid items to make this one look like it is 16. All right, the next thing is to make sure that this is occupying 3 columns and 3 rows. How do you do that? So we are going to learn something new. As I said, every grid item does have sub values, or they do have values of their own, or properties of their own that we can actually explore to create the design that we do see over here. Okay, how do we do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this first cell or this first grid item, hold Shift F, and then type the word grid. When you do that, the property of this grid shows up over here. So these are the properties of each grid item. Each grid item has a property. So these are the properties of this grid item. We want this to occupy 3 columns or to span 3 columns, which is the right word. So let's click here and say span 3. And then we also want the rows to be 3. So we can copy what we just typed and then paste it over here. 3 rows. So you might be asking, why is it that you cannot see it on 3 rows? I'm going to select back my section, and then you can see that we are back to this panel. And then in here, I'm going to go to align items and then say stretch. When I stretch this out, you are actually going to see what you do see right now. So let's save that. Remember, this is 1 FR. This is not a defined height value. Okay, so going back into this cell, we can see that we span 3 and then we span 3 rows too. The next one, so the next one, which is cell 2, we do think that this is spanning 2 rows and 4 columns. So what I'm going to do is selecting this, go in here and just type in, paste this in there. So 4, and then the rows is just 2. So you can see that it is not covering the entire space over here, which is good. The next one is this very one. This is 9 columns and then 5 rows. So selecting number 3, grid. So 9 columns, 5 rows. All right, the next one is this pinky one, which is number 4. So I'm going to go in, select number 4, go into the grid, and then in here, I'm going to paste what we copied already, which is 4 columns, 2 rows. As you can see over here. 3 rows rather, 3 rows. All right, the next one is this red, which is number 5. So I'm going to select number 5, go into the grid sub menu, paste what we did over here, which is 3 columns and then 2 rows. All right, so the question now is, why is this over here and not over there? We are going to fix that later. All right, the next one is, this is 4 columns and then 4 rows, because this is 2 and this is 3, which is 5, and this is a whole 9 row. So this is 4 by 4. It is also 4 by 4, and it is going to be 8 by 4. All right, let's do that. So number 6, open it up. I'm going to say span 4 rows, span 4, and then we're going to choose number 7. Say span 4. Let me copy that, paste it here, 4. All right, and then let's choose number 8. Then in here it says span 8, and then rows span 4. All right, so let's save that. So now, how are we going to make sure that this number 5 moves over here? It's not like we can just hold this and drag in here. This is not a grid builder layout. This, as I said, you need to actually know your values and how to manipulate things to be able to efficiently use it. All right, so I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go into the front end to show you something actually really cool. All right, let's scroll down to what we just did over here. Let's open our developers panel. And here, make sure that you are in element, and then you want to look for layout. If you do not see layout over here, you want to look for it. So I'm going to select layout. When you select layout, you do get something called grid overlay. If you have flex, you are going to see your flex overlay is over here. So all your flex overlays, you are going to see them. This one we want to talk about this grid. So you're going to get a grid overlay. So when we have on this, it tells you that it is for the first grid. So this is actually going to be for the second grid. So scrolling down here, let's check it. All right, when you check it, you do get all these numbers, because these numbers are going to be your visual guide. They're going to be like your tour guide into how to move this away from here to here. Grab it from here to here. How do you do that? We're going to use the numbering. You can see that this cell 5 is starting from number 9. It's starting from number 9. We want it to start from number 1. See number 1 and then number 9. We want it to start from number 1. So we're going to move this from here to here. So let's go into our design. And then one more thing I want to say is, remember, these are the columns. These are the columns. So column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5, column 6, column 7, column 8. We want to move it to column 1. In our design, selecting back on cell number 1, let's go into our grid. And then in the grid column, place your cursor to the front and input the value 1. It's going to look gibberish like this. After that, input the value, your backslash. So 1 backslash span 3 means that you want the item to start from number 1, and then you want it to span 3. So over here, I want you to select your cell number 5. After doing that, let's go into our grid. And then we want to move this cell number 5 from the number 9 to number 1. To do that, we are going to go into our grid column. Place your cursor over here, input the value 1, and then backslash. As soon as you do that, it takes it away from number 9 to number 1. And we can see that save. And in the front end, let's refresh. You can see that now this is down over here. Instead of it being on number 9, it is now on number 1. As you can see, number 1. All right, the next thing that we want to do is we want to talk about the rows. So this is row number 1, row number 2, row number 3, row number 4, row number 5, and so on. This item is on row number 10. We wanted to move it from row number 10 to row number 4. Or we wanted to start from row number 4. All right, how do you do that? It's the same idea. So we're going to go into our row, making sure that our cell 5 is still selected. In our row, place our cursor over here, and then say that you want it to start from number 4. So input the value 4 and then backslash. So now we have moved the item up from number 10 to number 4 by inputting this value. All right, we can save that. And then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to refresh. Another way that we can actually also do the span is we can input the same values that we did. We can say that we want your item to start from number 1 and end at number 4. I'm going to show you how that works. So going back into our layout, I'm going to select cell number 1, right? And then let's go into the grid. And then in here, we have said that we wanted to span we wanted to span 3 columns. When you do that, since this is the first one, it is going to actually start from number 1, right? So what we are going to do is selecting this, another way to say this. So removing the values here, we are going to say 1/4. So 1/4 is the same thing as span 3, because when you go back, let's save this. So you can see that this is 1 and this is 4, and this is spanning 1, 2, 3. So either span 3 columns can also be written as 1/4. This one can also be written as 8/17. So selecting cell number 3, let's go into the grid, and then in our span, you can see that we wanted to start from number 8. So start from number 8 and then end at number 17. So when you go back over here, you can see that it starts from number 8 and it's end at number 17. The same way you can do it for all the other items within this grid. So it's either you can span that 4, or you can use what you've seen over here. There are so many ways to deal with this, but we are not going to get into all of it in this video, or else we are not going to finish. Let's go back into our section, and then let's give this a little gap of, let's say, 10 pixels, and then it looks really cool like that. And then let's save that, and let's preview it in our front over here, and you can see we have actually been able, let's remove these lines, we've been able to create something that is a bit similar without these elements that have been placed. And if we place the element inside, we'll be able to actually build it nicely like that. All right, so this is the conclusion when it comes to our advanced grid, and also learning some of the properties that are available in it.